Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. The second part of this excellent conference. I just wanted to, before launching into today's agenda, various people have asked me questions about what I said yesterday, so I've just got a couple of slides to let you quickly get the official data on what I was talking about. So the first, can I just put those slides up? Before that, there was one slide before that. With a picture of the book, which was called Philanthrocapitalism. Okay, we may have lost that slide. Let me just talk briefly. I mentioned something called the Social Progress Index, which I co-founded. Very briefly, that's an index that is looking at non-financial measures of a performance of a country or a city or whatever, and we think it's a good way of measuring inclusive growth if you combine that with looking at GDP per capita. If we go to the next slide. That's my book, Philanthrocapitalism. It's got lots that's relevant to the history of philanthropy and also the new trends that I see globally. That was written with Michael Green. If we move on. So the Social Progress Index, very quickly, has three main pillars. One is basic needs, one is what we call foundations of well-being, and the third is opportunity. And there are altogether about 52 different data sets that are comparable around the world, or whatever regions we're comparing, that we use in the Social Progress Index. If we go on to the next slide, if you look at the world as a whole gets about a 61 score on social progress. To achieve the global goals that the UN agreed last year, we've got to get to about a 75 score for the world. And lastly, I mentioned that there's this study that we've just done for the European Commission, looking at the whole regions of Europe on a social progress scale. So if you look at the world average of 61, that's the sort of area that looks a kind of white color. You can see the lowest social progress areas are in the darker reds colors, and the higher social progress areas are in the darker green color set. So I guess we're at the heart of social progress here in the Netherlands. So I'm playing to the choir here. And lastly, if we got one more thing, I was also involved, and this is very relevant to the discussions we're about to have. I was involved in writing this report for a G8 government task force on social impact investing and how do we catalyze the market for social impact investing. If you haven't seen this report, it's called The Invisible Heart of Markets, and it's, I think, a very well worthwhile reading report. There's a whole bunch of country reports associated with that, and a number of national task forces across the European Union that have produced vast amounts of data and thought on how to encourage impact investing. If you haven't tapped into that, I would urge you to do so, because it's a fount of useful information. So that's all my self-promotional stuff and updating you on what was said yesterday. We now have two panels. The first panel session is on very related to social impact investing, but also other aspects of philanthropy, forms of financing to stimulate research and innovation. And to lead that panel, we're very lucky to have with us Wilhelmina Verloop, who is founder of War Child and leader of the Social Entrepreneurship Network in the Netherlands, and also has a social impact venture fund. And she will introduce her panel. I have to say she's a legend of karaoke as well, and from Skoll Forum one year where I met her there in Oxford. So I'm going to hand over to you and sit down. So thank you very much.
I will not try out my karaoke skills on you this morning, so don't worry. Thanks for the introduction, Matthew. Lovely to be here, and I'm very happy with the panel I'm able to introduce. And with this panel, with these 6 speakers, we'll look at different financing forms to foster research and innovation from different parts of Europe. All of the panelists will present what they're doing, and there will be time for questions from the audience after each presentation. So please stay awake, join the discussion. I will introduce the panel. Will you all come up? So we have Niek Dubbelaar from the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the Netherlands. We have José Moncada from Bolsa Social in Spain. We have Evita Zanuso from Big Society Capital. We have Magnus Magnussen from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. João, I'm still practicing on his name, João Ferraro de Santos from Portugal, from the Social Investment Lab, and Tom Oostrom from the Dutch Kidney Foundation. Please be seated. So they're all on stage, but the presentations will follow one another. And since we're in the Netherlands, we're going to start with the Dutchies this morning, with Niek and Tom, who will be doing a presentation together. Niek is a senior policy advisor for life sciences, health, tech transfer at the Ministry of Economic Affairs. And he's also very much a builder of bridges. I think he's been doing that in all the different aspects of his work, trying to build bridges between the government, between entrepreneurs, and between researchers, and creating impact in that way. So I think that's what he will probably emphasize on in his talk as well. And Tom is the director of the Dutch Kidney Foundation. He's an academic in health policy and management. At Erasmus, you studied, I think, but you also worked as a nurse, which I find is an amazing combination. And I think is striving very much for innovation in the health sector, especially with Kidney Foundation, to create new methods to support kidney patients. So together they will talk about partnerships. And so I don't know whom you will start, but take the floor.
Okay, shall we stand there or sit here?
I have a clicker here, I think. Is that it? I think you can stand here if you like, if you want to stay seated, whatever you prefer.
It's a bit strange to sit.
Clicker. Yeah, I'll go to the other way.
So we're doing a presentation. First of all, thank you very much that we have the opportunity to tell more about our collaboration. Well, what you see here is a part of the landscape of the Dutch charity. And in the Netherlands there are hundreds of foundations, and they are organized around themes of health, culture, nature, environment, international support. Every year, 1.9 billion euro is spent by the Dutch public to the foundations. And it's a real kind of the culture of the Netherlands that people give money to foundations, to charities. I'm also the chair of the Association of the Health Foundations in the Netherlands. These are the 19 biggest health foundations, for example, the Cancer Foundation, the Heart Foundation. So we work together as foundations, as health foundations, on different aspects. Together we have 5 million financial donors. And with financial donors, I mean the Dutch public. They give us money for doing our work. We don't get money from the government, so we have to raise our money ourselves. Together we have about 800,000 volunteers. That's really a lot. Most of them are collecting door-to-door yearly for us. That's also typical Dutch culture, that all these foundations have their own week. So, for example, the Dutch Kidney Foundation has its Kidney Week in the 3rd week of September. And 75,000 people, volunteers from the Dutch Kidney Foundation, collect door-to-door money for our work. And that's really, really great. We collect together about 300 million euro, and we work together on, well, first of all, to realize a more healthy society. So that means working on prevention. But also we try to get a role in research, innovation, policy in the Netherlands, but also to give patients a voice in research and policy. And at least we have got ideas about the way our healthcare system should be structured and financed. So that's also one of the things we are doing together. If you look at the healthcare foundations, the last 30 years, you see really a change. They all started, maybe already 50 or 60 years ago, as real administrative organizations. And that means there were procedures. You could get money for research, a grant for research, and there was a scientific board, and they decided where the money goes. In the 80s, 90s, that changed. The foundation started to formulate programs, for example, a program on prevention, or a program on organ donation, or a specific program for children. And within these programs, it was still possible to get a grant. But if you look at the last few years, you see another change. You see that more and more foundations are taking the lead in improvement for patients if they see that the stakeholders, for example, the industry, lacks to do it. And then they say, well, this is the part of our mission. If they don't do it, we try to change the world. And I want to show you a short whiteboard animation of the Dutch Kidney Foundation that illustrates this very much.
Imagine you're a kidney patient. You've been waiting for a donor kidney for years, and when you finally get it, all you can do is hope that your body will accept it. Until then, though, you're at the dialysis center 3 or 4 times a week to be dialyzed. You get tired fast. You often feel nauseous. Your head feels heavy. Your vision's blurred. You're on the outside of society. You're too weak to work despite the strict diet you're on. You know the hospital like the back of your hand. It's been years since you've been on vacation. There's a real chance that you will die within the next 5 to 6 years. Luckily, we have the opportunity to do something, to make a difference, to dramatically improve the lives of 2.5 million kidney patients worldwide, to make dialysis available to all. How? With the portable artificial kidney. In 1943, the Dutchman Willem Kalf introduced the first working artificial kidney. Wonderful, sure, but in the ensuing 70 years, the dialysis method has barely changed or improved. It's time something happened. It's time for the portable artificial kidney. Why? Because it has so many advantages over the current dialysis equipment. With a portable artificial kidney, dialysis becomes simpler and more flexible. It can even be used in more remote areas where infrastructure doesn't meet the highest standards. It simply needs its set of disposables and a standard 110 or 220 volts power plug. A portable artificial kidney can be used up to 8 hours a day or night, which results in a better general condition. Less nausea, less headaches, feeling fitter, a less strict diet. Patients can start thinking about going back to work. Kidney patients worldwide will gain a better quality of life. Our aim is to improve the quality of life for dialysis patients, and maybe we can even extend their life expectancy. A breakthrough for medical science, a revolution for the life of a kidney patient. For version 1.0, we need 7 million euros. In the years after that, the artificial kidney will become more and more effective. The Dutch Kidney Foundation is developing the portable artificial kidney with the aid of renowned researchers from highly acclaimed institutes and companies, in cooperation with health insurers and focus groups made up of dialysis professionals and patients. We're going to make the difference between life and survival.
It's just a way to show it. Better than telling it.
Yeah, like Willemijn introduced me, I used to work at the Ministry of Economic Affairs until 2 weeks ago. But I didn't update my LinkedIn profile yet, so that's probably why. Right now I work at the Netherlands Investment Agency, which is an agency which was established recently as a national contact point for the European Investment Advisory Hub, which was mentioned yesterday by Ms. Dastar. But what I would like to do right now is to look back at our cooperation, the cooperation that we've established in the last 2 years. And I will start by briefly mentioning the Dutch innovation policy, which also Mr. Wesseling, who was a speaker yesterday, briefly touched upon. And our innovation policy is focusing on tackling global challenges by creating public-private partnerships, using a sectoral approach, and we have selected a number of sectors, so-called top sectors, and within these sectors we are really working with different players, the private sector, knowledge and education organizations, and the government itself in the triple helix, which is a popular brand name for working together these days in innovation policy. And I think the key aspect of this innovation policy is that it is demand-driven. And what do I mean by that? It is demand-driven because we are living in a society which is more and more becoming a network society. The government doesn't have to take care of everything, but the people of the society are forming communities and working together to tackle the problems that they face in their lives. And government should facilitate that or catalyze it when it is aligned with the own policy perspectives that the government has. So, in order to facilitate public-private partnerships for research and innovation, the government has created a allowance, a public-private partnership allowance, topping up the investments of private partners with 25%. But until recently, this allowance was only open for companies and not for philanthropic institutes, which do make a part of the private sector as well. So using our network approach and looking to society and look where is the energy, where do people work together and really focus on building public-private partnerships for research and innovation, we discovered that the dynamics that were mentioned by Tom earlier, where health charities are moving away from a fund and forget approach and start looking for more integration as a partnership, moving away from sponsorship and becoming partners in projects. So seeing this development, the Dutch government worked together with the health foundations, in particular with Tom, to work out a new scheme that allows not only companies to benefit from this top-up, but also allows charities to benefit from this top-up. And that is exactly what we have done. We have created a financial instrument that tops up the contribution of philanthropic organizations when they invest in research and innovation for public-private partnerships. And we believe by doing this, we align our different agendas. We move on the energy that is already available within society. And I think we can really move forward to very nice cooperations and partnerships. So this is just a simple scheme of showing that within 2013, for charities, there was no possibility of participating in this public-private partnership allowance that we've created. So then in 2014, after a lot of cooperation with Tom, we opened up the possibilities for the charity foundations to participate in this PPP allowance. At the end of 2014, we evaluated this, and because it was such a success, we enlarged the possibilities for the philanthropic sector in 2015. But what we also did was we put a cap of 75 million on it, because like Tom was mentioning, the total budget of only the Dutch health foundations is around 300 million. So to make sure that we didn't lose too much of our budget to this very successful instrument, we put a cap of 75 million on it. And I'm very proud to say that last year we actually reached this cap, so it was good that the cap was there. And we also saw that from the 9 sectors that we are working on, 7 of those sectors, there was a cooperation with the philanthropic industry. So it was not just health industry, but also in water or agriculture or logistics. And I think Tom will now round up our presentation with a last example.
Yeah. Okay, well, I dare to say that this is really historical, what's happening now in the Netherlands, that our collaboration leads to a more proactive role of foundations in the Netherlands. So we are really happy with this. And I give you an example what happens in this top sector, life science and health. I'm a member of the steering committee, and plans are made there. And one of the plans is the next one. The plan is to make a consortium on regenerative medicine. And regenerative medicine is really the future in medicine. It's not only anymore working on symptoms or trying to lower the symptoms of a disease, but really to try to cure diseases. That's the future for medicine. That's not only for the patients very interesting, also for the society, also for the industry, for the economy, and also for science. So this is really interesting. It's just new. This idea started a few months ago, and we're working on it now. Well, what kind of achievement do we want to arrange in this program? For example, to try to make a new kidney, or to make a new heart valve, or new vessels. And well, the heart of this program is just using your own cells to regenerate your tissues and your organs. That's what it's all about. And we think that that's the idea. Not only the collaboration between the government and the foundation, but also with the provinces, also with universities, and also with the companies. We are going to make really a huge program with a lot of money and a lot of effort for the future. And for all these parties being part of this, the multiplier is very interesting. I could say to my financial donors that the euro I raise, collecting door to door, maybe will be 4 or 5 euros at the end of the year. So that's very important. So I really believe in collaboration, and we're happy with the situation at the moment in the Netherlands. And that's what's happening if you meet each other and you try to make a plan together. You can really change the situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Tom and Niek, for this inspiring presentation about partnerships. I have one first question, because I can imagine there must also be some risks involved or downsides of creating these kind of partnerships. Can you elaborate a little bit on, you've told where it works. Are there instances where it doesn't work? Is there learning capacity from what you've been doing in these last 3 years?
Well, I think from a governmental perspective, one of the risks is a financial risk. Like I said, we put a cap on it because we're afraid that it might take too much of this PPP allowance budget, and then companies which were the originators target for this financial instrument, they were left out. So that's, I think, from a governmental perspective, that's one risk. But secondly, what was very important for us from the governmental side, and I think it was mentioned yesterday also by the DG RTD, that the philanthropic charities, they have full autonomy. So it's not about influencing the charities themselves, it is looking for aligned interest, and from that working together.
You want to add anything to that, Tom?
Well, we got a lot of questions from outside people asking, well, you're going to collaborate with companies now. Can you do that as foundations? And is that tricky or risky? And I always say the most risky thing to do is to finance fundamental research. That's really risky, but you also have to do that. So I only see opportunities in this way, because this is the way to reach the patient. If you want to make the care and better for patients, you have to work together with companies. Otherwise, there will be no improvement.
Any questions from the panel or from the audience? Is everybody awake? It was a very clear presentation, and we were running a bit longer in the presentation. But is there any question anyone would like to ask? No? Here? Christine, can you?
Oops. Good morning. My name is Rosa Gallego. Good morning. My name is Rosa Gallego, and I come from DAFNE, the Donors and Foundations Networks in Europe. Impressive presentation and an incredible project, but my question is whether you're networking with organizations in other countries, because it is a worldwide problem, and you say you're trying to, help people that need dialysis in other countries, but I don't know if you're networking with other kidney organizations or organizations in other countries.
Well, this project on the portable artificial kidney, we collaborate with companies in Switzerland and Singapore. I also asked the other foundations all around the world, because I'm also a member of the Council of the International Federation of Kidney Foundations, asked them to collaborate with us. But we got a lot of applause. But the situation in every country is different. There are a lot of countries in the world where there is no dialysis available, because dialysis is very, very expensive. So I thought we're going to collaborate with the United States. But in the United States, they said we put all our effort on obesity, because obesity is really a problem. And they want to fight obesity, they want to fight diabetes, because those diseases are combined with kidney disease. So at the moment, we are the only foundation, but at the moment we're also talking to Kidney Research UK. They are interested to be part of the clinical tests. So I hope we're going to be partners on this.
Thanks.
Thank you. Juliette Adey, European Commission. I had a question for Nick. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I really think there's a lot of future in the way you are organizing and supporting philanthropy in Netherlands. And I am sure there is ways for replicability, and I wanted to know how you could foresee even more synergies between the existing EU programs, such as Innofin, for instance. It's up to you to start.
I think this is quite an open question, but let me just elaborate a bit on it. I could see, I think, two different ways how such an instrument could have a European impact as well. I think you could look at from a granting side, so just giving grants. You could think of setting up joint program initiatives, which are setting up at the European level and enhancing cooperation between different member states. And if you could find a joint program initiative on kidney diseases or something like that, and you could have multiple foundations of different member states spending a bit of their research money on this joint program initiative, then maybe there might be a way of topping up that that contribution a little bit. I think from the other side, looking to instruments such as the Innofin portfolio of different instruments. I think yesterday we saw that there are a lot of different instruments within the Innofin portfolio. And I think there's also a lot of new ways of trying to set up pilot instruments. And I think like the infectious diseases pilot, it might very be interesting to look for different collaborations with the philanthropic sector as well. But then again, I think there's also a lot of heterogeneity between different philanthropy organizations. Some of them are more used to work with companies, for example, or think more of how can I organize myself as a venture philanthropic organization, while others are not per se conservative, but they are just a very small team, and they will have to focus more on a safe way of using the money that they have been collecting. So I think there are possibilities for two very interesting ways of using this instrument as a best practice for whoever wants to use it.
Is there anyone in the audience from another country, the Netherlands, that has worked with this way of public-private partnerships? Is there any experience you can share on similar projects, or is this a Dutch innovation in that sense today? Well, I hope we can share more after. Oh, there's one. Great. See, I'm too blind. Please share, because I think it's interesting to know.
Frank Grossman from Zurich, Orphan Healthcare. When we started about 6 years ago, we approached the Commission for Technology and Innovation of the Swiss government, And at the beginning they said they don't want to work with foundations because they are set up to support startups and innovative partner in the industry area. And nowadays they totally changed it because they realized that working with foundations can foster the effect and support the collaboration area. And they're much more willingness to see that if you work together with an industry partner, and we also collaborate with industry partners. So we have an international children book brought up, and we're talking to major pharmaceutical companies because they don't do the work we do, and they can collaborate, and even the government got interested in reaching out to more clients because they know that they are there. It's a huge market, 22 million children suffering on rare diseases. So it was a learning for them, and they're really thankful that we pushed the door more than 5 years before they opened it. And now they're really willing to do it, but it's not set up as you did it in Netherlands. It's just started, and I think it's a good momentum to bring this message home and say, hey, others did it, and it's very successful, and we should definitely do it as well.
Thanks. Well, let's hope the method will spread through Europe. I will go on to our next presenter, which is João. João is Senior Investment Analyst at Social Investment Lab in Portugal. And he was actually actively involved with the first edition of the research program for the social impact bonds, working in the area of children and youth at risk. And he was also very active in developing the first actual Portuguese social impact bond. And I think that will be part of his presentation today. So João, please go ahead.
Oké. So, goedemorgen iedereen. Het is een genot om hier te zijn. My sincerest apologies if I accidentally insulted you in saying this. So my name is João Santos. It's a pleasure to be here representing the Social Investment Lab. I'll promise to be brief. I'll start off by quickly introducing some of the work that we've been doing. We'll move on to quickly taking a look at social impact bonds, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Then we'll move to some of the learnings that were generated through our first pilot in Portugal. And then in the end, I have a last slide just kind of highlighting the agnostic value of this tool to fund any target outcome. So, at the lab, we're a social finance intermediary, much like Social Finance UK. And we usually present ourselves by saying that we have a 10-year mission to catalyze the Portuguese social investment market from scratch to maturity. And of course, this involves working on a couple of different fronts. So we started off by focusing mostly on developing market infrastructure. So we convened the Portuguese Social Investment Task Force in order to gather some consensus from key players about what the market's first steps toward growth should look like. We also developed the technical proposal for Portugal Inovação Social, which is a social innovation fund that mobilized 150 million in capital from EU structural funds. And we introduced new financing mechanisms such as the social impact bond. After this step, we were able to start working closer to the ground. And we do so today through our capacity building and impact measurement programs, always with the aim of creating investment readiness for our top social organizations. And for this year, we have two big projects that are mostly focused on promoting an outcome-based culture within the public sector, and that's the Outcomes Academy, so that they start trying to move on from paying for services to paying for results. And then we have the Portuguese Unit Cost Database, which is a project called OneCost, which pretty much aims to estimate the per capita cost of our biggest social problems. So moving on and making sure we're all under the same page when we talk about social impact bonds. Perhaps I can start off by saying that the expression bond can be often a misleading term for those of you who are not familiar with this framework, because bonds in this case are not traded in financial markets. So I would recommend you to look at a social impact bond rather as a social impact contract instead. And in these contracts, we typically have a social investor providing upfront capital, and an outcome payer is going to pay back the investor if and only if we see that a service provider was able to generate the targeted outcomes. So the typical standard use case scenario for a social impact bond that you might have heard of will be using a SIB to fund a state-of-the-art preventive approach for a given social problem. And if this approach proves effective, it has the potential to decrease future demand for treatment services in that area. And very often government is paying for those services, so then they are able to benefit from government cash savings, which are then used to pay back investors. That's the typical scenario, and the Peterborough case for those of you who are familiar. In order to look at this more visually, just to make sure that we're all clear, so we can see on the upper left corner, we have a social investor providing capital to the service provider, who then is able to use that capital to work with its target population, supported through an intermediary who typically does performance management. And here we would have an intermediary just like the lab. Then throughout the project, data is collected and sent to an external evaluator, who is an unbiased source of impact measurement. And once the project is completed, results are presented to all stakeholders, and the outcome payer is going to pay back investors if those results are actually achieved according to the terms that are under contract. So why is this actually beneficial for some of these stakeholders? Pretty much for social organizations, we see that this really solves a lot of their typical pains with not having access to patient capital. So most social impact bonds are actually, longer term projects or short to medium term, but they're never really less than 1 or 2 years. And for social organizations that are very focused on getting salaries for the next 6 months, this allows them to focus on their mission. Also, because they're then pressured by social investors and they're supported by intermediaries, they learn a lot throughout the project, and they translate this into efficacy and efficiency gains about their intervention models. And finally, it's also, and specifically because this is a conference about research and innovation, very often SIBs are the right tool to actually fund untested and often quite expensive pilot programs. If we look over to public sector agencies, I think the clearest benefit here is that they enjoy risk-free intelligence, because there's a risk transfer from a social investor, from the outcome payer to the social investor. Government always gets to learn about the project and about what really works, even if the results aren't achieved and he doesn't have to pay back. On the other hand, if the approach is actually effective, they can directly benefit from some government cash savings throughout the project. And pretty much, they're also starting to get more and more aligned with an outcomes-based culture. So creating incentives to actually generate the results that we want. We should pay for job market reinsertions rather than hours of training in unemployment. And then for investors, it's pretty straightforward. We have a new channel for them to diversify their portfolios, and they no longer have to mutually exclusive decide between social impact and generating a financial return. So there are all these benefits, but of course, because there's higher complexity to manage all these stakeholders, there's also a bit of a downside. When it comes to making sure we're all under the same page, there are always a lot of communication costs. Actually setting up these final agreements and their contracts can be quite a pain according to the environment you're working in. This is a shame, but we do tend to see that traditionally investors face moderate to high risk for what often can be moderate to low upside. So what did we actually learn through our first pilot in Portugal? It was a pilot that I care about dearly. It was meant to improve primary education for 8-year-old students who in some areas have up to 25% retention rates. So there's a very clear problem. And each school year per student costs the government about 4,000 euros. So there's also a significant financial cost associated. And we tried to tackle this through the Junior Code Academy program, who pretty much tries to improve student performance and logical reasoning through programming classes. It's a very cool project. I can provide you the link later on, you'll love it. So what did we set up? Pretty much it was an untested intervention, so we wanted to set up a small pilot to start trying out the tool and seeing what learnings we could have from this process. And we got the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation to provide 120,000 euros in upfront capital. And then the Junior Code Academy used this capital to work with 3 primary schools, 65 students in total, treatment and control groups. The Social Investment Lab did its work pro bono to make sure that we could minimize total costs and actually kick off the project as soon as possible. And Nova School of Business and Economics was the chosen evaluator throughout the project. So this pilot is still ongoing. We'll be planning to have the first results around July to September. And if and only if by then the Nova University is able to report that an actual 10% improvement in both student performance to be measured through national exams and a 10% improvement in logical reasoning that is measured through something called the Ravan matrices, if both are actually achieved, then the municipality of Lisbon will actually pay back investors. So this allowed us to pretty much get a feel for what the next CIBS in Portugal will be looking like. And we can see that they'll be focused on generating the missing evidence base that we simply do not have in Portugal at the moment, which is kind of natural because we're at a very young stage for the social investment market, and there's just pretty much no scientifically valid impact measurement. You know, social organizations in their value propositions try to provide some metrics about the work that they actually do on the field, but there's no solid base about what they actually manage in the end. And by structuring this small pilot, we were also able to see something quite interesting, which is that structuring a CIB pilot might not be economically viable for everyone involved, for example, for the lab who did its work pro bono, but it always adds significant value. And this is because by setting up a pilot like this, you're actually making sure that everything is done from end to end at a much faster pace, and markets that are trying to kick off from the ground, they need quick wins. And this allows everything to attract momentum and get some investors looking into this. And this is quite important when you're looking at the CIB pipeline. And finally, by using social impact bonds for pilot programs, you're actually providing funding to test what often is an untested and quite expensive intervention, because we're talking about 120K for 65 students for a year and a half. So it's, for the Portuguese context, quite an expensive intervention compared to some other models that we do have. And this way, we're simply allowed to fuel research and innovation far more quickly than if we would be talking about, for example, a social impact bond that is used to scale up something that already has a proven evidence base. The third insight might be quite suspicious coming from a social finance intermediary, but we have seen that intermediaries like us do play a key role in setting up a country's first CIBS, because we, throughout the project, always found ourselves representing the missing stakeholder in the room and trying to set up a deal and a project that created the right incentives for everyone involved. And so we were able to change hats and kind of take a holistic look at the entire project. Finally, by simply being a single entity that is 100% committed to the success of the program, we were just able to accelerate the entire process. Then finally, we've also seen that because they combine all these stakeholders, they do require a lot more coordination and communication, so it's quite effective of a tool to break down silos. And then we couldn't wrap up this section without mentioning the role that highly reputable foundations can actually bring into setting up the first social impact bonds for new countries that are looking to try this tool. Because even though they're also a social investor in this specific CIB, the role that they played in being a mobilizer, in getting everyone together to sit down in a meeting and actually take the first steps was crucial for the project. Last slide. So now I'd like you to actually come and take a short trip with me from the social to the science world. In Portugal, traditionally we have an above average number of researchers per capita compared to the EU, but we traditionally fail to capitalize on all this knowledge that is being produced and transform it into economic growth. So typically when we look at how research projects are actually funded in Portugal, we have two extreme ends of the spectrum. So we have grant making, where we support PhD scholarships or entire research projects. And then on the other end, you have professionalized debt and equity investments. And there's just not a lot in between. So players like the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation, who are typically used to provide grant making for science projects, actually have no way to recycle this capital. Using the CIB framework, and my point with this slide is that this framework can be used to fund and try to achieve any given outcome. It doesn't necessarily have to remain in the social problem sphere. We could actually set up a deal where the foundation provides upfront capital for a research team to carry out its project from end to end. And if and only if the desired research findings are achieved, an interested research firm could actually pay back the foundation and the team according to terms under contract, and this would actually allow the foundation to recycle its capital and support the second project. So now we're here discussing social impact bonds, but in the near future, perhaps we could be talking about social impact bonds or science impact bonds, and that's a conversation that I would love to learn from. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your great presentation, Joao. Also explaining the impact bond, because I think it's complicated for people who haven't worked with it. Its potential and also the complications in getting it together. And I would actually, this is the first one in Portugal. I think the UK, in the Netherlands we have 3 now, but none of them have shown their results as of yet. So we have to wait to see how that develops. I think the UK is ahead here, so I'm hoping Evita can maybe share some knowledge of the UK context on SIBS and further on in the process and how they can foster innovation and research as well.
So I think in the UK we have 32 SIBS to date. We invested in the first social impact bond fund in the UK, run by Bridges Ventures, which some of you may know. I think they invested in around 18 SIBS across all different sectors. So addressing issues such as people from troubled families, trying to place children that are harder to place in terms of finding adoptive parents. So they were trialing a type of therapy. There's also been a health SIB, and I think we believe that there will be more of those. But the one that we have at the moment is in a very particular area in the north of England, where it's for people with long-term conditions who go to their GP a lot, and the idea is around social prescribing, so support volunteers and how they can be cared for in the community, so they would perhaps go to the GP less, because I think there are other issues at play. So we have a government that's very, very supportive of SIBS. They've announced, I think, 105 million that they're going to put for more SIBS. So I think they are they're seen as being very innovative, and I agree with Joao that they're great for trialing new interventions, but they've had mixed feedback, I think. Although we have had some results, actually.
Because there was a recent report on the first results,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Can you share some of those conclusions?
So the early SIBS that we invested in, some of which have actually paid back, I have to say, from our portfolio of investments, they have actually, from a financial return perspective, they have actually produced the best results. But that isn't to say that they're not risky, because I think they are. And obviously it depends very much on the sector that the SIB is being created for. But so far we think that they're a good thing, and they're very good for trialing something that's new and innovative. So.
Thanks. And Joao mentioned the complexity of being the broker in the middle, of getting the SIB to work, getting all these parties to work together. Have the UK SIBs already shown that the broker can also receive some kind of income from getting these SIBs together? Is that still done by pro bono services, or is this the ecosystem around the SIBs with 32 in the UK?
Yeah,
developing?
So in the case in the UK, quite a lot of the people that are doing the performance management is actually social finance, which I think Joanne knows very well. I mean, they are an organisation that's growing, and I think they've worked with you guys in Portugal as well. So it seems to be working so far. As I said, it's not without its problems. I think one of the toughest things about SIBS is actually finding the people, finding the commissioners for it, that people that are willing to pay for those outcomes. And I think there's still an education process that we're going through in the UK in terms of getting local authorities, local government officials that are already very busy, with cutbacks and trying to do more with less money, to have the headspace to think about this new type of structure. I think that's probably the toughest part, the engaging with the commissioners. So.
Thanks, Evita, for...
May I quickly comment?
Yes, please.
I just thought that was incredibly interesting because our reality in Portugal is rather, we have no problem with outcome pairs, but actually getting more social investors into this and accepting the risk, I think will be the biggest challenge in the next years.
It's interesting. I think in the UK, actually the last few SIBs have been oversubscribed in terms of people that want to invest. I think SIBs have captured the imagination of a lot of investors. They know that it's high risk. It's still, in the main, it's still predominantly foundations that are doing a lot of the investing, but we have seen individuals make SIB investments where financial advisors, wealth advisors have recommended social impact bonds to their clients with a tax relief.
It's interesting. In the Netherlands, it's actually the big banks that are now competing to get as many SIBs as possible. So the ABN AMRO versus Rabobank all want to have their own SIBs.
Insurance
so it's interesting to see that.
So, I think QBE, which is an insurance company in Australia, have also investing in SIBs. We're seeing actually investors are very interested. It's actually the commissioning that is more of the blockage, I think, in the UK.
Any questions or things to share from the audience here? Wait, I have one here. Oops. See if I know how to turn it on. Maybe you do. It's on? No, we need to turn it on. My technical skills are not really well developed. Sorry.
Johannes Rieber from the BMW Foundation. Thank you very much for the presentation. I've got two questions. The first is this intervention you were talking about, is it really unproven, or is it only unproven in Portugal and it was proven somewhere else in the UK or in the US? And the second question is, in the area of research, if we talk about SIBs, what do you mean by result? When we consider research as an open and autonomous process, what kind of results do we expect?
Okay, so for the first question, there have been similar interventions, specifically in the US, to try to see how programming classes can specifically generate improvements in logical reasoning, and those improvements can translate into student performance. So it was untested in Portugal with the Portuguese framework and the take that the Portuguese team decided to spin on it. About the second question, I have a quick question, which is, do you mean outcomes for the science impact bond or for the social? Okay, so that started pretty much as a side project out of curiosity from the invitation to come to this conference, because in the calls...
Creating innovation while doing the conference.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So during the preparatory calls, we were actually discussing what could be more interesting, and I was kind of invited to try to move away slightly from only discussing the social area. So because we actually are not inside the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation, but we were actually created by them through a 3-year grant. We work in the foundation and we have a very close relationship. And we see that they do provide all this money in grant making, and they're becoming increasingly interested in ways to be more efficient with the capital that they use. So I cannot go too deeply into what a science impact bond would look like, but I would do the parallel with the social sector, where you don't want to pay for hours of training, you want to pay for the actual result that you hope that those hours of training will produce. So we can talk a little bit further on if you'd like.
Yeah, we had one more question here. Yes, and then we probably will move on to the next presentation.
Barry Holwer from the Center for Philanthropic Studies here in Amsterdam. I was wondering, to what extent do you think that the SIB could be used as a European platform? So, Evita clearly told us that in the UK there's a surplus of investors. In Portugal, well, you're looking for them. How can those two be combined? What do you think?
So this is quite an interesting topic, I would say. And it's quite interesting to see that very often, because we're talking about social issues, there's a very nationalistic drive to see that, you know, specialists from the given country are the ones that manage to break through. So we think that in terms of getting pilots off the ground and getting implementations across Europe, we'll be mostly looking at some partnerships through consultancy and advisory, not really setting up international projects where intermediaries like us or Social Finance UK would be single-handedly responsible for creating social investment projects in another country. When it comes to investors, I think it would be really interesting, and I would love to see, for example, a lot of impact investing funds that we see coming up move away from a regional or local perspective into setting up, for example, an impact Silicon Valley in Europe, where we could have a single source looking at the entire market and no longer thinking about country by country, because we live in a globalized world. So I think that's the only way to go forward.
I think it's quite an interesting idea, because we actually did recently we did a call for a second social impact bond fund, because there's already one in the UK. And we wanted it to be something different, that would not just be a replicate of the first fund that Bridges actually already run in the UK. And initially, I think the idea was we would have loved to see a global social impact bond fund. We just didn't find there was enough people that wanted to get one going. We would only be able to invest in the UK because of the way that our investments work. But we would have been very happy to try and kind of convene the right people to have a global SIB fund, because obviously you also have the development impact bonds as well, although I think they're quite different in nature from SIBs in developed markets. Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Well, we can discuss this further over coffee later on. We're going on to the next presentation by José Moncada Durruti, the General Director of Bolsa Social. José has a background working for financial policy in the public treasury in Spain, then for the European Commission in Brussels, and for another EU, for the ESMA in Paris. And then, as I read about you, José, you found out that you were a social entrepreneur trapped in the body of an EU official, which I thought was quite hilarious. And he left the EU to set up La Bolsa Social, the first crowd impacting platform in Spain, together with talented professionals to connect social enterprises and impact investors. And I look forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, first of all, to the Center for Philanthropic Studies, to the European Commission, and to the government of the Netherlands for organizing this conference and for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here with you. So this is the panel of new forms of financing, and I'm going to talk about a particular form of financing that could be very interesting for social enterprises, so companies that have a positive impact in society and environment, and as well can be used for research, which is the crowdfunding. And in particular, I will focus on equity crowdfunding. So for that purpose, I will first try to frame the phenomenon of impact investing and the new alternative forms of financing. Then I will develop a little bit on the benefits of crowdfunding for the companies, the projects, and for the investors. And finally, I will explain a little bit the example of Bolsa Social, and what do we do, what is our mission, vision, and values, and the work that we have done. So social impact investing is basically, as you all know, is something that is growing around the world. There are more and more actors coming into this sector, where investors are seeking return, financial return, but as well they want to contribute with the positive impact that companies or organizations where they invest in produce in the society and environment. It's very interesting to see, and it's very rewarding to see that the Global Impact Investing Network made a survey in 2014 and found out that more than 90% of their investors, big institutional investors, were happy or very happy in relation to the two things, the two type of expectations that an impact investor has, which is the financial return on one side and the social impact on the other. So it's possible to merge both. It is calculated that, at least in 2014, there were $60 billion invested in assets of impact investment assets. And the growth expected for last year was 16%, so it's a growing tendency. This as to the impact investment. But on the other hand, I want to talk you about the online alternative investment instruments. So more and more there are platforms growing in all over the world. There you can see the platforms in Europe, number of platforms per country. And probably these figures are already outdated because this is a growing tendency as well. It was calculated by the Cambridge University that in 2014 there were transactions in this type of online platforms for 3 billion, so 3,000 million euros. And the growth expected for next year, so 2015, and it still has to be checked, was this figure would double. And this is a tendency that we can see. More and more investors are using these online platforms to channel their money to the projects that they believe in. In fact, on crowdfunding, just to warm up a little bit, I want to make a little quiz. Please raise your hand, those of you that know what is crowdfunding. Okay, so biggest majority. Please raise your hand, those that know how many types of crowdfunding are there. Okay, so a brief explanation. There are many types of crowdfunding, in fact. But you can consider that there are 4 big types of crowdfunding. The first type is donation way. So where you, through an online platform, you can donate. Imagine we are the crowd and we like a project, and each of you donate 10 euros for a project, expecting nothing on return. That is the donation type. Second is the reward-based crowdfunding, where usually is used for kind of cultural events or cultural projects, where you finance a project and you get in exchange like a reward, like a prize, like a t-shirt, a cup of tea, or whatever. Then there are 2 other types of crowdfunding, which are financial type of crowdfunding. The first one is crowd lending, where a crowd would lend money to a project, so it is a loan with a term in time and a type of interest, an interest rate. And then the final one is equity crowdfunding. So a crowd would invest through an online platform on the capital of companies, and therefore each investor would become shareholder of the company. This is the type of crowdfunding that we do at Bolsa Social, equity crowdfunding. So what we can see is that the growth rates in 2 years ago, in 2014, in the investment type of crowdfunding were incredible. Like the figures speak by themselves. And what we can see is that every year, figures of money channeled through this type of new instruments or new ways of investing are doubling or tripling. Because more and more people is getting interested in this type of investment. You can see a picture there of a beautiful building. This is the building where I used to work. This ESMA, which stands for European Securities and Markets Authority, a sort of the Pan-European Securities Markets Authority. It's a beautiful building in Paris of the 19th century, in the 7e arrondissement. And I like to bring this picture because it used to be the authority of the telegraphs. So in the 19th century, the top technology was the telegraphs, and they built this beautiful authority full of functionaries. But at a certain point, someone had the idea of inventing the telephone, and then this whole authority has to be dismantled. And now this is just an empty building where they rent the offices to companies. This is to characterize that technology can really change paradigms and can change the way we do things. And in fact, it's changing. Technology has changed our lives, the way we communicate, the way we interact, the way we get information. And it's changing as well the way we invest, the way we channel the money. Now with this, with your mobile, you can invest in Bolsa Social, which I would recommend. But yesterday night, in an extension of this conference, we were reminding, do you remember how you used to buy plane tickets 20 years ago? Can you remember? How were the plane tickets? Remember this? Well, how is now? Now in 2 minutes you can get a ticket here to go to India. So technology is really changing lives and also the way we can invest. In Spain, this is some figures. In Spain, you can see, well, that if you see the different colors intensities, just the years, and you can see how the different type of crowdfunding, you can see that there are more than 4 types, are growing. We have 17 million internet users. 4 of them are familiar with the concept of crowdfunding, and 60% of crowdfunding platform users do repeat. Why? What are the benefits? And now I'm going to focus on equity crowdfunding. So financing a company through an equity crowdfunding for the entrepreneur and for the investor. For the entrepreneur, it's clear, at least in Spain, it's an alternative source of financing where the banking system does not get into into financing companies and SMEs in an early stage and at the beginning of the evolution of a company. So, but more interestingly, and this is also very interesting for research projects, is a beautiful instrument to build a community of people that is committed with a project. And this is something that we have seen and we have experienced in Bolsa Social, that is one of the best added values of financing something through crowdfunding. Because it's adding an extra financial value to the company, which is a crowd of people that loves you, believes in you, and talks nicely about you, create new business opportunities because it's connecting you with people in other parts with which you can do business, that can distribute your products and so on. We have seen this happening. So it's also not only a way to get finance, but it's also a way to strengthen the company and the future of the company. The community builder, very interesting aspect of crowdfunding. Also for the companies, it's a way to validate the product and their pricing with the market, because they receive a stamp or a seal of approval from the market if they get the finance that they are seeking. For the companies, it's very interesting because it's the campaigning itself. You know how crowdfunding works. There is just an objective of capital, then there is a time frame, like 2 months, and within 2 months you need to find investors to gather that sum. It's a beautiful marketing tool for the companies. They are very active in the social networks. They are very active in the media, so people get to know them. And we have had experience of companies in Bolsa Social where, by the way, Bolsa Social stands for Social Stock Exchange. That's the translation into Spanish. So we have had the experience of people that not only invested but also bought the product of the company. So it's as I said, a good community builder. It's also an instrument that is associated with innovation. It's something new, and in fact lowers transaction costs for the company. On the other side, for the investors, for the people putting the money, it's an easy way to access deals, to access investment opportunities. Just Googling or going through internet and looking at them. And it's an access to deal for professional investors, but moreover for retail investors. In the venture capital escape, retail investors are prevented from investing in this type of opportunities. So by crowdfunding, they can access to these deals. Also, I will not extend because I think I'm going beyond.
The questions because you keep talking.
Yeah, I'm gonna cut short. It's a way where you can delegate as an investor the due diligence and the selection into the platform. What is Bolsa Social? And with this I will go very quickly. It's an equity crowdfunding platform for social enterprises and impact investors in Spain. Our vision is that we want to become a pan-European financial market for social enterprises and impact investors. How do we work? we, very briefly, we are very rigorous in the selection of the projects that we publish. They have to be good business models, companies with good business models already proven, growth potential and positive impact. We have a selection committee, we undertake the due diligence, the analysis, and then we publish the projects in bolsasocial.com. Anyone can invest for 2 months. And we work with Triodos Bank, a very well-known bank here in the Netherlands. Also after the companies, so if the company gets the money it's seeking for, then it's a success, and we go to the notary. If not, we give back the money to the investors. There is a follow-up where we request the company to report periodically during 5 years at least on their results and on their social impact to the investors through Bolsa Social. Well, this is our team, as you can see, very handsome men and women from Spain, with some grey hair as well. And we are members of the Spanish Net of Social Impact, that I have the honor of chairing as well, and the European Venture Philanthropy Association. So we are the first equity crowdfunding authorized in Spain. There are 30 other platforms, but we are the only one authorized in Spain by the CNMV, our National Securities Markets Regulator. We have more than 1,300 people registered in Bolsa Social, and so far, we started in October last year, we managed to raise more than €500,000 in 6 months from 140 investors. This is one of the companies that we, and with this I'm finishing, this is one of the companies that we funded. Utopicas is a company very active in the field of the sharing economy. They manage co-working spaces, and they were growing, and they get 250,000 from 46 investors. Nostock, they have beautiful set of biofertilizers and bioprotectors for crops products. Very nicely, I love this company. I don't have time to explain you more. They got as well 250,000 from 80 investors. And this is where I was saying before, investors and clients promoted the company and helped the company find distributors in other regions of Spain, thanks to the crowdfunding campaign. And now we have, well, Teterum and this other company, this job open for investment in Bolsa Social. So this is it, as you see, a new way of financing companies that is accessible to anyone, and is building and bringing some extra financial support to the companies. And this is it. Minds are changing. Have you seen this can? This exists. There is a green Coca-Cola has renounced to the red color. They managed to change Père Noël from green to red. You know that Père Noël was red before. Père Noël, Santa Claus. He was green, and they, with a very funny and clever marketing campaign, they managed to convince all of us that Papa Noel is in red. Santa Claus is in red. And now they have renounced to the red to come back to the green, because they understand that minds are changing, and now consumer and people want to take economical decisions introduced not only on the basis of purely price, benefits, risk, but as well integrating an ethical dimension in the way they consume, they save, they invest, or they create companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jose, for inspired speech. I understand we can talk a whole morning about crowdfunding and the possibilities for impact and innovation, as about SIBS and other. Because everyone will want coffee at a certain point, I'm going to skip the questions on this topic. I'm sorry. And go on to the next presentation by Evita, because otherwise we still have Evita and Magnus coming. Evita works for Big Society Capital, has a background in finance, a long background in finance, and has started at Big Society Capital 2 years ago, and has a business school background, works for charity as well, but I think Big Society Capital is an interesting subject here to see, not at one instrument, but using many different instruments to create innovations and research in the UK. So please, Evita.
Great. Let's have a look. So, hi, everybody, and thank you for having me here to talk to you a little bit about what we do at Big Society Capital. Just so I know, how many of you have actually heard of, sorry, too short. How many of you know about Big Society Capital and what we do? And okay, so Some? Okay, good. So I don't know how to work the clicker. There we go. Okay, so I guess the best way to describe us is probably that we are a social investment bank. We were actually set up by government, but now actually run independently. And we were funded predominantly using dormant bank account money. 400 million of the money that we have come from dormant bank accounts. And 200 million came from, in the form of an investment from the 4 high street banks in the UK. We were set up almost 5 years ago now, coming up to 5 years. And to date, as you can see, we have actually invested in around 48 deals, and of which around 260 million of the money was committed from our own money. But a very important part of what we do is that we try to bring other investors into the investments that we've made, and that's attracted more than 300 million co-investment. That's a really, really important part of what we do. And we really have 2 roles in the social investment market in the UK. We are an investor ourselves, so with the 600 million, the idea is that we are looking for investments, which we do through an intermediary. We don't invest directly into projects, but we do it through intermediaries. And there's a reason for that, and the reason being that we didn't want to just be the entire market. We wanted to bring in other investors. And really, the rationale behind that is, 600 million may sound like a huge amount of money, but actually, for the kind of really, for the societal problems that we see in the UK, it's really a drop in the ocean. And what we should be here for is to catalyse other investors into this particular market. So our other role, as well as being an investor, is we call ourselves a champion. So we're a champion for the social investment market in the UK. And what does that actually mean, a champion? So we have advocated for things like a tax relief for social investment in the UK. We go out, we do roadshows, we try to educate and talk about what social investment actually is and how it may be relevant for charities and social enterprises that have a trading model, why they might want to consider this form of finance, because actually social investment is money you have to pay back. It's not a grant, it's not a donation. If you can get a grant and a donation, why not have that instead? Well, we think because grants are diminishing, and there are many things that charities do that doesn't have a trading model, where grants is very precious, and that's what it should be kept for. And if you actually do have a trading model and you want to scale up or replicate what you're doing but in a different region, then maybe social investment could be an option. But it's important to say that we don't think that this is, it doesn't replace grants. It's something that should be sort of in conjunction with grants and donations. So that's a little bit of background, I guess, about what we do and social investment. Just talking a little bit about the way that we think about the world, or the way we think about the social investment market in the UK. As I said, we are investing for financial return, but also for social return. And it's very important that the social return is intended. So we are making investments with the intention that it's producing a social return. It's not an accident. It's not a nice to have. If we are presented with a fantastic investment opportunity that's going to make us money, but it doesn't, we don't feel it's socially impactful enough, we will walk away from the opportunity. I think that's what separates us from a different type of investor. We are absolutely a social impact first investor, but expecting the money to come back and to be recyclable. The way that we think about issues is we think about different social issues that we think are at play in the UK. So there are 10 of them, which you can see on the graph there. So everything that we do, we invest in, we spend time on, has to fit into one of those 10 issue-based areas. And we have 4 strategic priorities. So one is how can we help small to medium-sized charities that have a trading model access the repayable finance that they want. So that's one area, that's a strategic priority for us, and how have that been reflected in the way that we invest. So we've invested in a couple of social banks in the UK, where we are essentially equity investors. We've capitalized them so they're able to lend more to SME charities. Innovation, so very topical for this conference. And this is really about how can we help social enterprises and charities that are innovating, doing something different. So we do that through the SIBS social impact bonds that we've invested in, the social impact bond fund that we've invested in, and also investing in funds that lend to or make equity investments to social entrepreneurs. So that's another area that is a priority for us. Thirdly, mass participation. We want to see social investment not just as something that is for foundations and really high net worth individuals, but really for retail investors, the man on the street that want their investment or their savings to be used for something more socially useful. So that translates itself into community shares. So we have community shares in the UK. That might be also something that happens here. As I said, we advocated for a tax relief, a social investment tax relief in the UK, so that more individuals will be able to make social investments and benefit from this tax relief. Crowdfunding, it's another area that we think is really important in terms of helping democratize social investment, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. And finally, scale. So these are projects that lends itself to, lots of money. So this is where, our capital is useful, but it's really about trying to bring in other capital. So the issue areas that this really affects is particularly in housing, where we have a real problem with housing, not just cheap housing or affordable housing, but really housing for people with learning disabilities that really need other interventions and other support, and also health and social care, which is very topical in the UK and I think Europe as well, with an aging population. And those two in particular we feel are areas where it lends itself for lots. We need a lot more than what we can actually bring in terms of investment capital. So I'm going to talk, I thought the best way was to actually, because we have lots of investments, 48 to date, but to really kind of drill down on, I'm going to give you some examples of case studies of what we've done. The first one I'm not going to spend too much time on because we already covered a little bit of that, is around social impact bonds. As I said, there's already a social impact bond fund in the UK which we invested in, and as I said before, around 30 or so SIBs to date in the UK, addressing really very different issue areas, from youth unemployment to preventing people from going into care, children from going into social care, to social prescribing for people with long-term conditions, to try and improve their health outcomes. We are very keen for a second outcomes fund, but something that's not just a replicate of the first. In this particular, so we just did a new call for funds earlier this year, and to really invite people to come to us with ideas. And in particular, what we wanted to see was how they're going to be able to bring in other investors, particularly retail investors, using the tax relief, because there's an opportunity in the UK for SIBs to receive this 30% tax relief if an individual invests in it. The individual benefits from a 30% tax relief. In terms of who are the investors, so far we've seen, so in the first fund it was foundations that invested, a couple of local authority pension funds, which we think is great to have kind of more institutional type investors. Actually, I think the European Investment Fund was also an investor, and also Deutsche Bank as well. And so diverse type of co-investors there. Second case, following on from kind of what Jose was talking about as well, crowdfunding. This is an area that we really, really wanted to catalyze because we think it's a great opportunity. So earlier this year, we put forward a pot of money. It will be between 5 to 10 million. We went out and spoke to pretty much all the crowdfunding platforms that are out there in the UK and said, is there any reason why you're not already listing social investment opportunities? And we would like to have a match facility whereby if you list social investment opportunities that benefit from the tax relief, and a lot of them already list, so the equivalent for small to medium-sized businesses that qualify for enterprise investment relief, so it's the same, very similar, 30% tax relief for the investor. And it was really a way of encouraging crowdfunding platforms to list social investment opportunities. And we had good feedback. We had people that want to apply, and it's likely that will go live later this year. So we hope this is an important way of kind of making available social investment opportunities, not just to sort of very wealthy individuals or foundations, but really anyone who wants to sort of put their capital to a better use and deploy their capital in this way. And I'm going to talk very briefly about two other, we believe, very innovative ways of that we've invested. One is so Social Finance, which we've already mentioned, is an organisation in the UK. They launched something called a Care and Wellbeing Fund earlier this year. And this is a really exciting collaboration, actually, between Social Finance, us, Macmillan Cancer Charity, which is the first time an operational charity in the UK have made a sizable social investment. And also the Health Foundation in the UK, which wasn't a social investor, but gave a long-term grant to develop this idea. And this is basically, it's like an incubator. And they're really looking to develop and scale community-based services like palliative care, end-of-life care, for individuals that quite often are in very costly hospital care at the end of life. And actually, it's not very appropriate for them, they're not very happy, and it's very expensive for the government. Early days, it was only launched last year, but it's something that some of those ideas, they can be scaled. So we're kind of waiting and seeing, and I think a good bit of collaborative working between an operational charity, a foundation, us, and so on. And then finally, a housing example. This is quite a unique and very much a pilot, a very innovative, comes under our innovative investment strand. In the UK, we have a kind of strange situation where there are people that have applied for asylum and they can be rejected, but they have the right to appeal. But they haven't actually been removed from the UK. Now, they're in this kind of really terrible asylum limbo land where they're not, they don't qualify for housing, and they cannot work legally, and they don't really get any benefits. And which means that they're really kind of people in a kind of very bad situation. And the Commonweal Housing is a project whereby they are looking at how they can create this cross-subsidy model. So basically, if you are one of those individuals, but you have a child, the local authority in the UK have to house you. They have a legal responsibility to house people. But if you don't have children, they don't have to. So what Commonweal is doing is they raise social investment from ourselves and a number of foundations, actually. And they use the money to buy properties, which they then lease to, it's a charity in the UK called Praxis that work with people with immigration and asylum issues. And Praxis, in turn, leases these properties to the local authority that pays for, but only the individuals that have children. But they also house, on the kind of cross-subsidy model, they house the people that actually don't qualify for that particular help. But as I said, this is, it's something new that we're kind of trialing. And if it works, this cross-subsidy model, the idea is that we would want to replicate that elsewhere as well. So here's a few examples of the things that we do, and happy to sort of take questions if we have time. So,
well, thanks very much, Evita, for a great presentation. Questions for Evita? I mean, it's a big subject because Big Society Capital does a lot of different things, but any specific questions in the back?
Thank you for the presentation. Laura Badia from the Poverty Action Lab. I wanted to ask you for the social impact bonds, how are you measuring the outcomes? Are you using for every social impact bond a randomized control trial, or are you using other methods of impact evaluation?
So not every social impact bond uses randomized control trials. I think it really is very dependent on the particular social impact bond. So at the outset, so when the bond is being created, the investors and the performance managers, together with the people that are delivering, so the frontline organizations, the charities that are delivering the interventions, we would actually sit down and figure out what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and link those to payments. They have to figure out, well, the person that's willing to pay for those outcomes, what is the cost saving ratio that they're getting, that they're able to pay back. And and they usually are a mix of both quantitative and also qualitative as well. So, but it's very much dependent on what the intervention is and the particular bond. So.
Is there a question from the panel, maybe? Yes, João.
I was wondering which type of investments would be actually done through the Social Finance Care and Wellbeing Fund. Are we talking standard equity or different products?
So it's interesting. So far, so as I said, it's very new. Okay, the first investment they've actually made is a SIB. It's actually a SIB for. It's very interesting. It's a SIB for older people that are. It's a loneliness SIB. And we know that loneliness actually causes more health problems than maybe even obesity does. And the idea really is the individuals, the older people, have to be referred by their doctor. So they're usually people who go a lot to their GP, for very valid health reasons, but probably because they just don't see or speak to many people. So they're going to the GP for that reason instead. And so the GP will then basically prescribe for them to have a volunteer that would, do social activities and help them kind of manage their conditions at home. That's the first one. But we don't foresee that SIBS is the only thing that they'll invest in.
So the idea would be more to focus on the specific scope, and then the projects would define the appropriate product.
Yes. Yeah. I think the structure, whether it be a SIB, whether it be equity or debt, it doesn't matter. It's more what is the intervention that would be helpful.
Thank you, Evita. And I know the Big Society Capital publishes a lot of reports on what you're doing. So I think for people that are interested to learn more on the model, the fund-to-fund model, and the different aspects of the market, I think your site and your publications can be found online. Yes. Magnus, long wait. I'm really happy you're here. Magnus is country rep for the Northern Europe for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He used to work for the Swedish Foreign Ministry and UN as well. And now, since 1 year, the Gates Foundation in Northern Europe. So thank you for joining.
Thank you very much. And it's a true pleasure to be here. Sorry I couldn't be here yesterday with you all. This is obviously a subject very dear to the foundation. The world has made great progress in recent years, thanks to the Millennium Development Goals, particularly. Yet still 6 million children, and I don't have a PowerPoint, so you'll have to look at me instead. Yeah. But compared to 1990, under-5 child mortality has been cut in half, as you probably know. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of extreme poverty, Yet 6 million children under the age of 5 still die every year, mostly in poor countries, and mostly from preventable causes like malaria, pneumonia, and extreme diarrhea. And hundreds of millions more go through life sick and undernourished, or stunted as it's called, limiting their capacity and sapping the limited resources of poor families in developing countries. And this is not a small problem, it's a huge problem. And in fact, in these regions where this is happening, you have the biggest population growth by far today. So in my role, this is the issues that we're dealing with and engaging in the Netherlands on. There's a huge need for new vaccines and drugs to reduce particularly infectious diseases, because those affect these populations more than the next billion. So the bottom billion, the infectious diseases, is still the biggest killer. And I think that's really important to remember. And also, agriculture and livestock are the two areas that matter most in terms of their income and their nutrition opportunities for 70% of the world's poor. The problem with markets is that they're not necessarily on their own providing research and resources in these areas. So to help to address the market failures, the Foundation invests about 500 million a year in global health, which in terms of tropical neglected diseases is about 20% of the global investment, which says more about how little investment there is in the tropical diseases. And we invest approximately 225 million in agricultural research. In the Netherlands, we have approximately $100 million invested in Dutch research companies and also universities, and I'll get back to that. Obviously, this is a fraction of what's needed. In these times of austerity, or maybe coming out of austerity, of course, it's understandable that resources are needed in other areas, and governments are still struggling, I think, in that space in Europe, particularly also with the refugee crisis. And the unemployment rate is still high, of course, in some European countries. So the question is, can we afford this, and how can we make every euro spent on research go as far as possible? And I think the answer to the first question is that there was a study a few years ago that shows for every euro invested by EU governments in global health and R&D, an additional euro was invested by the public, private, and philanthropic sectors in European laboratories, universities, and companies. And there is an additional study that shows in the Netherlands the investment in R&D for development, so for the poor countries in the world, actually generates economic growth in the Netherlands. So it's not an expense, it's actually an investment that generates growth. And they also create thousands of high-value European jobs that contribute to the quality of European research and EU's growth strategy in itself. But how can we make our investments go as far as possible? And we ask ourselves that all the time, as well as most of you do, of course, in your work. We've invested approximately $39 billion in grants in the past 15 years. At current rate, about 3.9 billion a year. But only 1.5 billion out of the 39 in total have gone to non-debt instruments. So it may sound like a big amount, but in relation to the overall portfolio, it's not. But we want to increase that. And here, primarily, we have seen guarantees and equity, some debt buyback. And I get back to some examples. And we call these non-grant interventions program-related investments. And at the Foundation, these investments resemble the grant-making process in that we only use them in furtherance of our programmatic and charitable objectives. They're used as a high-impact tool to stimulate private sector-driven innovation, encourage market-driven efficiencies, and attract external capital to priority initiatives. And we have the luxury that we can actually invest in whoever we want, and we look at what are the best players out there. So there's basically three things to drive our investments. First of all, the areas of greatest unmet need, and I just mentioned the ones we believe are the most important ones. So basically global health with a focus on infectious diseases, maternal newborn health, sexual reproductive rights and health, nutrition, sanitation, and also financial services for the poor, which is the next kind of level up in terms of poverty-oriented work. And also we invest in research to spark product innovation with real impact. We involve the private sector to make markets work for the poor. So those are the three dimensions we look at. And a few examples here how we are going about this. And you probably know of the grand challenges that help build pipeline of products for global health. And it starts with great ideas, of course, and early stage research. And research is risk-taking. And I think we're fortunate as an organization that we can take risks. And we can also fail and learn and continue our collaboration. So the grand challenges in global health will start in 2003. And it's focusing attention on big scientific challenges that, if solved, could lead to major advances in preventing, treating, and curing diseases of the developing world. A few years later, we launched Grand Challenges Explorations, and the idea was to encourage innovative ideas from anyone and make it easy for people to apply. So twice a year, we invite proposals on special challenges. All people have to do is to fill out a 2-page application online, and grant recipients receive $100,000 to pursue their ideas, and successful projects have the opportunity to receive additional funding. So here, for example, we funded some great European projects, like the work of Alan Saul, a researcher in Italy who developed a vaccine for Shigella, a bacteria that is leading cause for severe diarrhea. And this has been a huge, actually, impact on child mortality already. We also make equity investments in promising startups to stimulate private sector innovation. And here, for example, the German biotech company called CureVac, which developed technology that has the potential to make vaccine development significantly faster and cheaper. And we're not the only investor here. We have other partners, of course. And product development partnerships. This is where the Netherlands is one of the leaders by far. And we're really pleased to see that the government sustained its funding for it. This is one of the main messages, actually, by Mr. Gates when he was here a couple of months ago. And we're happy to see that this is going on. And this is a way, of course, to address the lack of commercial incentive to develop global health products. And this is a relatively new kind of organization. And it uses public and philanthropic funds to bring together the scientific expertise of academic researchers and the product development know-how of the private sector. And an example here is the funding from 5 European countries and the Gates Foundation to the Swiss-based Medicines for Malaria Venture, or MMV, where we partner with Novartis to develop a new anti-malaria drug that's already been distributed to 300 million children in 50 countries. And what's also really exciting is the product development partnership together with GlaxoSmithKline and on the Tafenon Quinn, I think it's called Tafenon Quinn. It's a new vaccine that we hope will be launched very soon now, this year, that potentially a single-dose cure for malaria. Not maybe for all of malaria, but it's hard to know exactly, about 40–50% of it. And finally, I just want to mention a Dutch biotech company called Synco Biopartners, which played a key role working with another PDP called PATH, which is one of the foundation's oldest partners with equity investments from our side in it, to develop a new low-cost meningitis vaccine, which since the introduction in 2010 has helped more than 217 million people to be immunized and resulting in thousands of lives saved. So these are the kind of high-impact innovations that we are funding. And we may not be very innovative in terms of the financial instruments we use. I mean, I think some of the most innovative things we've done are basically volume guarantees, I think, where we've together with some other governments like Sweden and Norway, we guaranteed a certain volume of contraceptives. So a procurement basically guarantee to the market, and then the market had to compete with the price, and the price came down 50%, and then the UN was provided resources by governments to buy the products. So that's, of course, one way we can work, and the guarantee has not yet been released or used, and it doesn't look like it will. So I think in summary, I think this kind of continuity from discovery research through clinical trials is crucial to succeed in developing new vaccines, drugs, and diagnostics for global health. The European Commission's Innovative Medicines Initiative and the European and Developing Country Clinical Trial Partnership provide important funding platforms for public-private sector collaboration to advance global health research. And to maximize their impact and achieve the greatest return, it's important to prioritize and coordinate investments that accelerate the most promising and urgently needed products. So I think I finished with an example from the Ebola crisis. So the IMI Ebola Plus program was launched in response to the Ebola virus disease outbreak that started in Western Africa in 2014. with an initial 200 million euros awarded to 8 projects. And the program was also addressing related diseases such as Marburg. And this was extremely important, and it was a sign that there's potential to act quickly. So this kind of strategic focus and action is needed to speed up product development for the developing world. And it would be great to see more examples of this kind of rapid funding mechanisms. So in conclusion, we are keen to learn more about the innovative finance space, so to speak. We have a division, as I mentioned, called Program-Related Investments, and we're looking every day at opportunities that is not just the typical equity and the typical debt or guarantee intervention, but other types of partnerships that we can develop. So we're keen to learn more, but we are also very strategy driven. So we are very specific on what we invest in. And so the instruments of investment will always have to trigger a strategy like malaria or tuberculosis. So thank you again for being here.
Thanks, Magnus. Thanks also for bringing the global perspective to this morning. And one question I have is, I mean, what Gates Foundation is amazing. You have such an amount of funds to really move in the research and innovation field. Has the foundation also been able to attract other funds? Like Evita says that other funds often are attracted by being able to push for research and innovation in a certain subject. Do you have any data on whether you've been able to bring in more funds into this space? Apart from your own, that is.
No, absolutely. I mean, I don't have the data in my head about it, but clearly the leveraging of resources from other partners is one very important part of our work. And we do it particularly, I would say, on the, kind of at global level and more upstream. We have not been very good, I have to admit, in terms of kind of partnering on projects with bilateral donors, for example. It's something that we're looking at now to see how could we engage with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for example, in projects generally, so whether it's research. I think in research it's been better. I think there clearly we have, through the product development partnerships, attracted other funders. We haven't been very keen on taking first loss. So the partial risk guarantees is basically the later end, so to speak, or the less risky end of the, But I think we're looking at how we could, either with our convening power or with our financial capacity, which is very flexible, of course, how we could attract and unblock other types of funding. So we're talking to institutional investors, to sovereign wealth funds, and to the big pension companies in Europe and government pension funds, and in America as well, to see how we can help bring them on board in terms of development finance. I don't think it will be the type of impact funds that they will go into as a first choice. There are some opportunities maybe for smaller institutional investors to enter into bond instruments. I know that Swedish SIDA and Danske Bank are developing a health innovation bond where there needs to be a partial risk guarantee, and they've approached us on it, so we're looking at it. So the partial risk guarantee would make the bond attractive to institutional investors, maybe not the bigger ones, but more like the Church of Sweden or the City of Stockholm or something like that. And then the proceeds would then, of course, be invested, in this case, as debt into innovation companies. So I think there's some of those instruments, but on the bigger side, I think one very exciting development is to see how you can use either debt-based crowdfunding and/or the institutional investors, the big ones in the world, to offload highly performing loans from the international finance institutions, from IFC and others, to free up the capital of these organizations. It's a very political issue, but I think this is, maybe not so much linked to R&D, but it could be, just to allow these organizations to do their work and not have to wait for a capital increase. This would have happened in a normal commercial setting, but it's not happening in the government-owned bank, so to speak. Yeah.
Thanks. I mean, is there any other questions for Magnus, or maybe for Jose, about crowdfunding, because we skipped, that you want to ask plenary, or during coffee, of course, is also possible? Any questions from or are you very eager to get your coffee break? I see one there.
Hi, Boaz Kogan from the Catalan Institute of Nanotechnology. Just wanted sort of a general query, but more related with the social impact bonds. There is obviously the mechanism that's being promoted quite heavily at the European level of the PPI, the Public Procurement Innovation Mechanism, where funding is provided to offset the risk in public agencies when they procure services or goods. And obviously I see that this is a sort of grey area with the social impact bonds. How do you guys see those two mechanisms or formats working together or overlapping?
Who wants to take it?
Not me.
I think the question is that you've stunned the panel. Does any of you see?
I can try. So, I think quite often social impact bonds have been talked about as a great way for government to only pay for outcomes rather than commission services that are needed in the state. I think that in reality, social impact bonds politicians may disagree, but in the way that we've seen the best way of using social impact bonds is when they're trialing something new and different, something innovative, like what I mentioned before about trying to get harder to place children to be adopted using a new type of therapy. They tend to be small scale, very localized, where you're almost gathering evidence that this actually works. Personally, I don't think they should be used for sort of, as a byword for government cuts. And there's an argument if this particular therapy for these children that are being placed to increase success of children that are being adopted works, there's an argument that actually government should be then, once that's proven, they should actually be commissioning that across the board without using a social impact bond. But of course, people's opinions differ, but that's just my own opinion.
Thanks, Evita, for coming up with an answer. Now, also Matthew is coming aboard, so we really need to go for the break. I want to thank you for adding your experience and knowledge in this field. I think it's about new financing instruments. It's also about how to spearhead innovation in different fields and about networks, about getting other groups to get involved in research and innovation with crowdfunding. I think we've seen a lot of different tastes in this panel on how we can foster. I think that what Magnus said, although the Euphoria report shows there's a lot of European money, I think that it's not a huge increase. And I think we do need to attract new money to the field of research and innovation. And I like that there's been a lot of elements of your different presentations and how to bring other players to this market and how to create more research and innovation for societal impact through these new mechanisms and also through networking. So thanks very much for sharing that. And please, any questions we can do during coffee break.